Let's begin with the foundations. Rich Moriarty.
Thanks, Vicki. Before turning directly to the history of the rule of law, I'll note that its two most prominent meanings are at odds. What's called a thin rule of law is imbued with a lawfulness perspective, requiring adherence solely to procedural standards. By contrast, a thick rule of law is imbued with a legitimacy perspective. It requires adherence to not just procedure, but moral standards, and particularly the enforcement of human rights and equality of treatment. The thin meaning, which focuses solely on the procedure, has justified egregious abuses of human rights and intentional suppression of what's at value in human society. Martin Luther King Jr. cautioned, quote, "Never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal," unquote. When Putin and Mugabe and other autocrats pledge to uphold the rule of law, they may mean that the law will be used to control society and suppress opponents. After World War II, though, for autocrats to make contrary remarks, as when Pinochet said, quote, "The day they touch one of my men, the rule of law is over," unquote, is incredibly rare. Recognizing these differing meanings, alleged adherence to the rule of law is sometimes suspect. Nonetheless, it is stunning that the rule of law was every leader in nearly every country in the world claims that the rule of law was central to their government. That's at least until 2017. Is any other governance principle so universally proclaimed? Until 2017, the United States had generally at least aspired to applying a rule of law that means adherence to procedure, moral standards, human rights, and equality of treatment. In 1958, Dwight Eisenhower said that, quote, "The rule of law does more to ensure freedom from more than ensure freedom from high-handed action by rulers. It ensures justice between man and man, however humble the one and however powerful the other. A man with $5 in the bank can call to account the corporation with $5 billion in assets, and the two will be heard as equals before the law." Now, regarding the history of the rule of law, I'll merely touch on some high and low points. Require a semester to go through the entire history. Plato declared society would function well only if, quote, "law is the master of government and government is its slave," unquote. Aristotle warned that law must be supreme because even the best of men would be driven by the wild beast of desire and passion. And he said, quote, "The law is reason unaffected by desire," unquote. During the 500 years of the Roman Republic, a period over twice as long as the American Republic thus far, absolute royal authority was deemed the antithesis of good governance. Cicero, who witnessed the end of the Roman Republic, condemned any ruler who did not abide by the law as a despot and, quote, "the foulest and most repellent creature imaginable," unquote. The Roman emperors exercised absolute authority outside control of the law. The despots Cicero feared. Justinian, after becoming emperor in 527, claimed that God granted him total authority over all aspects of life, religious and secular. The Justinian Code that he created declared menacingly, quote, "What has pleased the prince has the force of law," unquote. And, quote, "The prince is not bound by the laws," unquote. From then until the American Revolution, monarchs would often claim that God had granted them absolute authority. The rule of law and its advocates would occasionally surface and even obtain temporary victories. Generally, they were suppressed, often brutally, when the monarch regained sufficient power to reassert absolute authority. During a moment of leverage that favored the rule of law, King John of England was at the mercy of certain nobles and agreed to Magna Carta. English monarchs thereafter honored its terms only when forced to, while in severely weakened states. As a myth and symbol, though, Magna Carta became a rallying cry for the rule of law. It was in America rather than England that the rule of law really took hold. In 1606, the Virginia Charter mentioned the rule of law as a governing principle, with that language later repeated in most other colonial charters. Seeds were planted that later sprouted into the governments created by the American founders. In 1770, John Adams appealed to the rule of law as he persuaded an American jury to set aside passion while he was defending British soldiers criminally charged with killing Americans during what was called the Boston Massacre. The law, Adams argued successfully, cannot be disturbed by passion, since it is, quote, void of desire and fear, lust, and anger. Thomas Paine gave birth to American dedication to the rule of law. Early in 1776, his common sense not only convinced Americans that independence was essential, but proposed that the American government be grounded on a written constitution, quote, by which the world may know that in America, law is king. After independence was, thanks to Paine, declared on July 2nd, 1776, the founders perceived their most solemn duty as creating written constitutions that enshrined the rule of law and that ensured executives exercising only limited powers were subject to the law. Until 2017, presidents repeatedly declared fealty to the rule of law. Until then, no president had openly attacked the rule of law itself. Some presidents strongly defended the rule of law while vehemently disagreeing with a particular legal rule. Lincoln, abhorring Dred Scott holdings that declared African slaves subhuman, insisted that ending slavery required a constitutional amendment. Dwight Eisenhower railed privately against Brown v. Board holdings that declared school segregation unconstitutional, but in public forcefully and repeatedly defended those holdings, warning those opposing forced integration that he would use the full power of the United States, including whatever force may be necessary, to prevent any obstruction of the law and to carry out the orders of the federal court, even while he privately burned over the Brown v. Board rulings. Bringing us up to date, last Tuesday, consistent with a sea change since 2017, we witnessed quite a different view expressed by a president. Quote, when somebody is president of the United States, the authority is total, unquote.
Rich, that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I would like you to draw out a bit further the issue of states' rights versus those of the executive. This is really critical now, obviously, with the governor saying, no, the power belongs to us, and the president backing off a little bit. But what, in your opinion, does the Constitution, what powers does the Constitution give to the president?
In the area, that was the reference actually right at the end. The current president was conveying a belief that he had total authority. Just being the president, he has total authority. The Constitution is quite different in its message and in its substance. The founders were looking at ending absolute authority. They had suffered under a king. They didn't want a king. And they knew that the executive had to be contained, had to be given limited powers, and be subject to the law. In the very area that was being discussed on Tuesday, health, public health, it is incredibly clear, not only in the Constitution, but in all of the decisional law, that it is primarily the states that have authority over public health. And the federal government has had to take great care in how it intervenes in public health issues throughout the history of the country. End result, the stay-at-home orders are fully within the governor's prerogatives. The president, and Chuck, you talk on this too, but I think the president could say we should have a national stay-at-home order for consistency. But ultimately, a governor, even under a national stay-at-home order, could say, wait a minute, it's my authority within my state on that issue. I think everyone would agree it could be a very good thing to have a national stay-at-home order, but ultimately within each state's boundaries, the governor and the state authorities within the legislature, et cetera, within the state are the people that handle public health within those boundaries.
Thank you, Rich. That couldn't have been clearer. I would like to turn now to Chuck Case and the judicial